The United Arab Emirates has spent 2 decades trying to escape the ordinary fate of small states through the network power of hyperconnectivity. It built ports, bought influence, cultivated militias, courted Washington, hedged with Moscow and Beijing, and projected the image of a country too nimble, too wealthy, and too useful to be cornered by geography. The Little Sparta brand sounded less like a nickname than a doctrine. Small federation with middle power ambitions, relative military excellence, and enough network leverage to shape its strategic environment on its own terms. The past 3 months have exposed the friction between Abu Dhabi's ambitions and geopolitical realities. Iran's attacks on Gulf infrastructure have confronted Abu Dhabi with the dissonance between its self-perception as a middle power and its structural vulnerability as a small state. Presidential advisor Anwar Gargash recently lashed out at neighbors and partners, posting on X, "The friend has turned into a mediator instead of being a steadfast ally and supporter." His post captures the frustration in Abu Dhabi over the state's inability to use its leverage to rally neighbors and partners around a more aggressive stance towards Iran. In an article last month, Emirati commentator Tariq Al-Otaiba denounced Arab solidarity and multilateralism for its inability to collectively deter Iranian aggression. A month earlier, his older brother, the UAE's ambassador to Washington, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, announced in an op-ed Abu Dhabi's readiness to join an international initiative to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, with the UAE prepared to share the operational burden. These messages of defiance aim to conceal a harder truth. The UAE's accumulated levers of influence have not translated into strategic autonomy when confronted by the coercive power of an unrestrained Iran. The load-bearing assumption that network power can substitute for strategic depth has shown its limits. Under President Mohammed bin Zayed, Abu Dhabi perfected a form of statecraft based on weaponized interdependence. Logistics corridors and hubs, sovereign wealth funds, information and media networks, commodity traders, private military and security companies, and proxy relationships from Yemen to Sudan gave the UAE reach far beyond its size. The model was clever, often effective, and at times ruthless. It allowed Abu Dhabi to insert itself into conflicts, markets, and diplomatic bargains while maintaining the aura of a state that shapes events rather than suffers them. But power through networks does not translate into the power of outcomes in the Gulf. When the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, decided to escalate, the UAE's impressive portfolio offered little coercive value. Despite the UAE luring Russian money and oligarchs to its jurisdiction, Moscow did not come to Abu Dhabi's defense. Beijing issued the familiar language of concern and stability. Washington reassured, but delivered very little in terms of deterrence. The very structure that had made the UAE appear indispensable also revealed its limits. Being a hub for global capital, a logistics node for world trade, and a partner to every major power is what made the UAE a prime target for the IRGC. And having entangled IRGC financial networks into Emirati financial institutions and logistics companies was not enough to compel restraint from a neighbor willing to absorb pain. This is the paradox of Emirati statecraft. The UAE has built one of the most sophisticated influence machines in the region, but remains a prisoner of geography. Its ports sit on the wrong side of Iran's missile and drone envelope. Its wealth depends on confidence, connectivity, and uninterrupted flows. Its economy is a target precisely because it is open, visible, and globally networked. All Iran needs to do to weaken the UAE strategically is to remind investors, insurers, shipping companies, and expatriates that the Emirates is not an exception to the Gulf's insecurity. This is why the current rhetoric sounds so brittle. Abu Dhabi wants to preserve the image of Little Sparta, disciplined, untouchable, more capable than its neighbors, and certainly not as vulnerable as other small Gulf states. Yet the war has shown that the UAE is exposed to the same regional pressures as every other small Gulf state. The performance of invulnerability has collided with the material facts of proximity, demography, and the dependence on external security guarantees. Ambitious Emirati military strikes inside Iran in retaliation for Iranian strikes on critical UAE national infrastructure will have done little to restore the balance of deterrence, with an IRGC that enjoys a much higher tolerance for pain than the Gulf Cooperation Council states. These strikes followed attempts by Mohammed bin Zayed to court his neighbors to join the UAE in a more assertive joint military campaign against Iran. With a request falling on deaf ears, Abu Dhabi has since resorted to strategic communication as the preferred tool of signaling defiance, assertiveness and strength. Emirati messaging has thereby often come at the expense of its Gulf neighbours, the GCC, the Arab League and mediating partners such as Pakistan, accusing them of not standing firmly enough with the UAE. But the complaint also exposes the deeper problem. Abu Dhabi spent years trying to transcend the Gulf's collective security dilemmas. It treated the GCC less as a necessary regional order than as a constraint on Emirati ambitions. Now, under pressure, it is discovering that the same neighbours it once outmaneuvered are also the neighbours without whom it cannot stabilise its own environment. The instinct in Abu Dhabi will be to double down in the information environment. There will be more lobbying in Washington, more strategic messaging in Western capitals, more curated narratives about Emirati resilience and exceptionalism, and more quiet briefings about unreliable neighbours. There will be attempts to turn this crisis into proof that the UAE deserves stronger Western guarantees and a harder line against Iran. But this will not solve the problem. The UAE does not merely need stronger bilateral assurances from the United States or a louder diplomatic campaign against Tehran. It needs to accept that its destiny cannot be determined autonomously. The only viable route to Emirati security runs through a regional security complex in which Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain and the UAE recognize that their vulnerabilities are shared even when their policies diverge. There can be no pretending that one of them can secure itself while the others hedge, mediate or burn. Abu Dhabi must stop treating mediation by Pakistan, Qatar or Oman as a betrayal and start seeing it as part of a division of labour. It must stop viewing Saudi caution as weakness and recognize that Riyadh's strategic depth and energy weight are assets that no UAE-led security architecture can replace. Israeli opportunism to provide operational support for Emirati defense in a war that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unleashed on the region cannot compensate for the UAE's geographic proximity within a shared Gulf security complex. Abu Dhabi can shape its destiny only by admitting that it cannot shape it alone. Its ambitions as a middle power is not the problem. The problem is the belief that middle power activism can somewhat erase small state vulnerability. The UAE's future security will not be secured by louder narratives of exceptionalism, nor by the fantasy that Little Sparta can stand apart from the Gulf's collective fate. It will be secured, if at all, by a sober recognition that all Gulf states live under the same shadow, even when they cast different ones.